I just want to start by saying that this talk is about how your language experience affects the way that you distinguish sounds in your language. This is a low-level process. This means this is not something that's within your control. Languages differ in terms of which parts of the acoustic signal are important for speech production, and these differences are really important because they reveal how the brain produces and processes the speech signal for humans generally. This is not about one language necessarily being better or easier to understand than another language. This is just about how the brain might use certain parts of the speech signal versus other parts of the speech signal. So I'm going to be focusing on two sounds that many of you are probably familiar with talking about, dentals and retroflexes. So both Hindi and Tamil have this class of sound that are called retroflexes. These are the duh sounds, and a class that are called dentals. These are the duh sounds. And these are acoustically and articulatorily similar. This is how they're produced. So on the left, you see that's your dental. The tongue comes up to the teeth and creates a seal there so that air can't get out for a brief period of time, and then the tongue comes away and air comes back out again. Something very similar happens in what's called a retroflex stop. So here the tongue is curling up and creating a seal there, and then again the tongue will come away and air that has built up will come through that small opening. So you have duh on the left and duh on the right. For many of you, you're probably not used to thinking of these as being similar sounds, and I will get back to that in a moment. First, I want to talk about the speech signal generally. The raw speech signal looks something like this, and it can be represented as intensity, which is basically loudness over time. And there's a lot of different types of information that you can get from the speech signal. So this part right here, you can see is very noisy. That is a type of information. It's telling you how the air is flowing. It's called aperiodic because there are no repetitions of the type of movement that there is. And this is an S. Over here we have a vowel, and you see a repeating pattern. So that's called periodic. So we have aperiodic and periodic. We also get information about the frequency of the sound. So how far apart each of these pulses is gives us a sense of frequency. And then over here, we have something that's basically silence. Silence is also information. You don't have to remember all these words. The point is just that there are all different kinds of information that we're getting from the speech signal. How the air is flowing, whether there's sound or not, how long a sound is. These are all just different kinds of information, and they're all available in the speech signal. So I want to turn to an important distinction, which is audition versus perception. Audition is what your ears are doing. So the sound comes in, your ears are taking speech sounds in and sending these auditory signals to the brain. And then the brain is doing some processing. So remember all those different kinds of information. The brain is highlighting important information that are for distinguishing the sounds of your language, the language that you are speaking. So distinguishing P from T from G from S. And each sound has multiple properties that can be used to distinguish it from other sounds, as I was showing you before in the speech signal. And so the information that's used or ignored for the purpose of distinguishing phones is actually going to depend on the language and which phones are actually in your language that have to be distinguished from one another. So while we are hearing, i.e. the audition part, while we are hearing all this information, we're probably only using a subset of this information to actually understand speech. So the extra information that you're getting, you're hearing, but you're not necessarily using it to distinguish P from T, for example. If you have extra information that you're not using for that, you might be using it to find out where a person is from, or whether it's somebody that you've heard before, some kind of identifying information about the speaker. So a little analogy. So sounds that are not similar, so for example, P versus L, nobody would ever argue that P and L are similar sounds. You can think of trying to distinguish an elephant from a monkey. This monkey is from this campus. So you can say that they're both mammals. That's like saying they're both speech sounds. and they both have tails, but any number of things will tell you that these things are different. One of them has tusks and a trunk, and the other one does not. One has hands, and the other one does not. I mean, one can ride a motorcycle, and the other one can't. I mean, you get the idea. So this is, your brain probably does this pretty easily. Dentals versus retroflexes. So again, in many of your native tongues, if not all of you, this is something that you do every day and don't think about and would never think about as being hard. But for someone like me, whose native language only uses one place of the mouth to put the tongue tip for this type of consonant, this is a bit harder. So this is trying to distinguish Indian and African elephants. But even here, there are multiple cues that can tell us that these things are different. So in the elephant case, you can look at the ears, or the size, or where the highest point is on the body, or whether there's one lump or two lumps on the head. There are several different cues, and you could probably show any one of those, and I'd be able to tell which type of elephant it was. Similarly, with retroflexes and dentals, there are multiple different cues that tell them apart, and any one of them you could probably use for telling the two different sounds apart. So while both Hindi and Tamil both have both dentals and retroflex sounds, and they contrast, which means they make a difference in how you say the word, and if you replace one with the other, you would get a different word. Where a retroflex can occur in a word differs between Hindi and Tamil. So we take Hindi first. A retroflex can occur pretty much anywhere in a word. It can occur at the beginning of a word, it can occur at the end of a word, and it can also occur in the middle of a word. In Tamil, this is not the case. In Tamil, you only get a retroflex at the beginning of a word in borrowings. So compare ti versus thi. So ti, of course, is a borrowing from something like English. Yes?
Unvoiced retroflexes can occur in the beginning, even in Tamil.
But in native Tamil words, they are either exceedingly rare or only in borrowings, right?
The occurrence of voiced retroflexes are rare, but unvoiced is quite common.
Are they really quite common? And are they native Tamil words? Or are they maybe from Sanskrit? And are they frequent in the language? Like per utterance, are they very frequent? That's maybe something to think about. And of course, you would never get ra at the beginning of a word, or other types of, many retroflexes are definitely prohibited at the beginning of a word, I believe. But you can certainly get them word finally, right? And you can get them in the middle of a word for sure. So this is important for knowing where, this distribution is important for which cues are going to be available to you in determining whether you've heard a retroflex or a dental consonant. So you hear different types of cues in different types of sounds. So if we're distinguishing between vowels and consonants, vowels can provide one type of information, and we'll just call them formants for the people here who are not linguists. This is essentially a resonance of the vocal tract, and you can hear these generally only during vowels and a few other types of sounds. And when we speak, it's not like every sound is separated. Your mouth will anticipate an upcoming sound so that there will be overlap between sounds, right? Which means that if you have a vowel and then a consonant, the upcoming consonant will leave a trace on the preceding vowel, and you will be able to hear what's coming up. So we're going to talk about these formants and formant transitions going into the following consonant. We also have cues that come from consonants. So remember when I was talking about the tongue coming away from the mouth, and you get that the air rushes through that's built up during the time when it's been sealed off. That's called the burst, and it's only 5 to 10 milliseconds, but it actually includes a lot of identifying information about the consonant, and it's incredibly important for identifying which consonant has been spoken. So just to sort of summarize this, we have vowel cues coming up to a consonant, and we have burst cues, which are after the consonant, is basically right when the consonant is finishing. So just to visualize these, on the left, this is a sequence of someone saying arda. The black caterpillars type things are the formants. And even if you can't interpret this diagram, you can see that the two are different. So if you look at the second and third from the bottom, in the retroflex case, they're coming to meet each other right before the consonant. But in the dental case on the right, the second and third never meet each other, and the third one is rising rather than falling. So this is these are the formant transition cues that you get before the consonant. And then the arrows are showing you the burst. You can't really see very much how they're different here. But if you look at a spectrum, so we're looking at amplitude on the y-axis and frequency on the x-axis. So this is showing you how strong each frequency is. You can see that the energy is a bit more evenly distributed in the dental burst, but in the retroflex burst, you can see more shape, you can see more peaks if you were to sort of approximate a line covering the spectrum. So these are, this is just showing you that they're different. It doesn't really matter how they're different, they are just different. So here is my question. So remember how we have two different types of cues, some that occur in the vowel preceding a retroflex, and some that occur, or a dental stop, and some that occur after. So if you are less likely to have a retroflex, if you have a retroflex if you have one of these stops at the beginning of a word, then you won't necessarily have a vowel preceding to give you the vowel cues. So if you are more likely to start your words with with having to distinguish these stops, then I hypothesize that you'd be less likely to be relying on the vowel cues. So if you're less likely to have a vowel, you rely less on vowel cues, is the idea. So the thought was that if Tamil speakers are less likely to be having to distinguish between a retroflex and a dental at the beginning of a word, they will be less likely to rely on the burst cues alone, and will be more likely to be relying a bit more on the vowel cues. And the opposite would be the case for the Hindi speakers. So this question is, does the distribution of sounds in your language affect the part of the signal that speakers are listening to? Okay, so I performed what's is a classic technique in phonetics. It's an identification task. So you have a speaker sitting in a sound booth, and they have headphones on, and they're given a short sequence, and they're forced to choose between retroflex and dental. So they just hear either da or the, or arda or ada, or odd or odd. And they're given one of these, and they have to say whether this is retroflex or dental, and they just hit a key to indicate which one they heard. But I controlled these stimuli for which type of information was present. So I created what's called a continuum. I used real speech to create sort of re-computerized, synthesized speech. And so this is a classic type of experiment where you make a continuum of sounds, and I will be playing for them for you shortly, where you start with two endpoints, so like a da and a da, and the 5 points in between sound gradually more like the other end. So the parts in between are sort of ambiguous, and the endpoints are very clearly one or the other. Oh man, this is not. There we go. Okay, here's your retroflex. That was my, I recorded a native speaker, and I just took out this middle sequence, the ada and this ada sequence, and then I fed them into the synthesizer. This was after doing a cross-language and cross-speaker comparison to make sure that the speaker I chose was representative of a whole bunch of different speakers. Right, so I used what's called the CLAT synthesizer. Fun side note is that the CLAT synthesizer made by Dennis Klatt is the same, or is basically the same synthesizer that Stephen Hawking uses. So Stephen Hawking sounds like Dennis Klatt, which is kind of funny if you've ever used the CLAT synthesizer. Okay, so basically I just equalized pitch, made this continuum I was talking about between the two different stops. And then I altered some of them. So I made 6 different continua. One of them was normal, so it was just from ada to ada. And then for 5 of them, I messed with the vowel cues and the burst cues so that people would be forced to use some or the other cues. You will hear them shortly. So that's the normal one. So you could probably tell that the ones at the beginning and the end were really obvious, and the ones in the middle were a little bit less obvious. Did you notice a point where it crossed over from ada to ada, like somewhere like after the middle point? So just to imagine this, you're sitting in a sound booth and you hear one of those, and you're asked, was this retroflex or was this dental? Except you're not actually asked in that way. You're asked in a way that corresponds with your language. This is playing differently than expected. It's supposed to show you the words as well, and they're kind of important. Whatever. Okay, so that was just if you're only getting vowel cues and you're not getting burst cues, all right? The next one, that's only getting burst cues. Did you find that harder or easier than the first one to tell the difference? Or about the same? Could you tell the difference between retroflex and dental in the one I just played? That's supposed to be a little bit harder. If it's going to be like this, I may skip some of these because it's not crucial to hear all 6 continua. So for this one, I took the most ambiguous burst token and attached that to the vowel sequence so that people would have to rely on just the vowel cues, and the burst could have been anything. All right, so if you're a Tamil speaker sitting in the booth, this is what you would have seen. So this is saying if you hear a retroflex sound, hit the Z key, and if you hear a dental sound, hit the slash. And if you're a Hindi speaker, this is what you see. So just some things about the experiment. I had 10 repetitions of all the stimuli, and they're all mixed up in the experiment. And then I gave a break just over halfway through because this is an incredibly boring task. If you have taken my experiment, you think that's boring, this is worse. And the experiment lasted about 20 minutes. So these are mostly UC Berkeley students, and this will be important later. There were also some members of the Berkeley community, and I had roughly equal numbers of Hindi and Tamil speakers. For those of you who are stats interested in, I used, because this is just people were given a binary choice, I used a mixed effects logistic model, and I used the program R, if you're familiar with it, for statistics. And what you're going to see is predictions of the probability of a retroflex response. Basically, it's predicting whether, given a token or one thing that someone is listening to, it's predicting how likely they are to say it was retroflex. And I used a different model for each continuum where response is related to the step, so which of those 7 steps was presented by language, and then random slope for subject number. So I got very, very slight differences that were statistically significant, but there were very small differences between language groups. The P level had to be reduced because I was making so many comparisons or looking at so many different continua because there were 6 of them. So 0.05 over 6 gives you 0.0083. And so there's a trending overall language effect for the burst series only. So this is the series I was actually most interested in. What this means is that whether you speak Hindi or Tamil affects how sensitive you are to the burst cues alone without the help of the vowel cues. And then for some of these other continua, which I'm not going to focus on right now, there was some interaction on particular steps of the continuum, but not the entire continuum, so it only mattered for part of it. So here are a bunch of lines. This is showing you differences between Hindi and Tamil performance. So on the y-axis, we're seeing how likely people are to respond retroflex, and on the x-axis, you're seeing the continuum number. The far left, so the one side of the continuum, is supposed to be the retroflex side, so it's unsurprising that for most of these continua, people are almost at 100% identifying that end of the continuum as retroflex. The other end is supposed to be the dental end, so we're getting very few dental responses. Just a note, this is, especially for those of you who are doing linguistics, this is a classic S-curve. So what you're seeing is that at ends of the continuum, people are very, very sure about how to classify a sound as either retroflex or dental. But in the middle, where it's perfectly ambiguous, they really have no idea. And there's a really sharp drop-off in that middle there. So this is just how your brain is generally very good at classifying sounds, even if they don't sound like sort of your prototype. So steps 3 and 5 on the continuum really aren't going to sound perfectly like a retroflex or dental, but your brain is pretty good at deciding, okay, this sounds more like a retroflex than a dental, so I'm fairly certain that's what I heard. This is showing zooming in on a few individual differences. So this is the baseline condition where I altered no cues, and speakers are roughly the same. Hindi versus Tamil speakers are classifying these sounds roughly in the same way. This condition is, this is just the vowel cues, so just the vowel that's preceding the consonant, and there are no burst cues to help decide whether they've heard retroflex or dental. And here we're actually seeing that the Hindi speakers are a bit more certain about what they've heard than the Tamil speakers. And then here's the burst condition. This is the condition where I said Tamil speakers are going to be less sensitive to these cues because they're less likely to have retroflex sounds at the beginning of a word. But in fact, Tamil speakers are more sensitive to these burst cues, especially at the retroflex end of the continuum, than Hindi speakers. So this is going the exact opposite of what I had predicted. This is a mismatch condition, which I didn't play for you. This is where on the step 1 end, the vowel cues sound like a retroflex, but the burst cues sound like a dental, which is a huge mind scrambler, I guess. And here we're actually seeing that the Hindi speakers are classifying more strongly than the Tamil speakers. So they're not really fazed by the burst cues being wrong, but they're not fazed by the burst cues not matching the vowel cues. They're really it turns out they're just listening to the vowel cues, which is again going against the specific hypothesis. So we're seeing that Tamil speakers are slightly more sensitive to burst cues than Hindi speakers, and Hindi speakers are slightly more sensitive to the vowel cues. So how to interpret this? So one question is differences in number and type of phonotactic systems. Phonotactics means the order in which sounds can occur in your language or where a sound can occur in a word. Remember I noted that a bunch of these speakers, all these speakers were UC Berkeley students. Almost all of my Tamil speakers also spoke Hindi. And I suspect that their familiarity with multiple different types of phonotactic systems actually made them more sensitive to different kinds of cues, which is why in the mismatch condition they were a bit more phased by the vowel and burst cues not matching each other. There's also a question of frequency of contrast and functional load. Functional load means how much a certain type of cue matters in your language. Frequency of contrast is how often do you actually see these consonants making a difference in the meaning of a word. So these types of differences could have swayed the results in one direction or another. So just as a brief example, I think there's actually a higher functional load. This is just a suspicion. I haven't actually looked into this very deeply because I haven't done a whole lot of corpus searching. But I think that in Tamil, there's actually a higher frequency of contrast with between retroflexes and dentals. So if we just take, for example, the nasal series, so this is na, nya, na, nga, ma, right? In Hindi, you never get na, the retroflex nasal, unless it's before a retroflex consonant or a retroflex stop, like da, so nda. But in Tamil, you do get a retroflex nasal just on its own without a stop following, as in varnakam, right? So this could have made this might make this difference in how important it is to be able to distinguish retroflexes from dentals may have made Tamil speakers more sensitive to certain types of cues than others.
So you said something about the distributional specifications about the retroflex.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So this is just a
Let's take a word. We have something like the bow of this character Arjuna.
Yeah.
It had a name Gandhi. Okay.
Okay.
And you have another term which is so Ganana. That is to count something, right? These sounds have these words. Now I don't know whether what you're saying will really hold or.
Because I only get the contrast right when I'm doing perception about 50% of the time. Will you tell me whether are you talking about the nasals in these words?
Yeah, not just nasals. I mean, you see, this also has to do with the fact that there have been claims made about Hindi. That in Hindi you do not get a r unless it is intervocalic.
Yeah, so that's because, isn't that because the flap occurs when you get retroflex stop intervocalically, like pretty much everywhere?
Yeah, and so what people have done is, what they say is that there is no contrastive distinction between a normal retroflex
and a flap.
And the flap.
I would believe that.
Yeah,
even though, in theory, there is such a contrast, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, the moment you look at these two words, Deep and Gardana, you actually get two sub-minimal pairs, if not two minimal pairs, minimal pairs. And these two words will also lead to some problem with what you just said about the retroflex nasal.
Explain how. So we have, so this is it a schwa or is it a long ah? Wait, so you're saying you have a, and then, oh wait,
Gardana.
Gardana.
One is Gardana. Oh, sorry, Gardana.
So this is an infinitive, right?
Okay, I'll take that. Okay.
I mean, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one. And the other is Gadana Karna, that is to count.
So is that ra?
No, ra. It's not ra.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I was hearing an R. I get it. It's retroflex. Okay. Yeah. Gunna. Okay.
Okay.
So this is your infinitive. They're both infinitives. Okay. What's this? This is wait. Where's this the bow? Which is which? Sorry.
Now, since assuming that you're the phonetician here,
Uh-huh.
I think this is what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So, and then you have another word. Just write it. For the
Okay.
sake of it.
Okay.
You write the word Gandhi. Then half na, yeah, and then normal retroflex stop, the.
So I mean, but right? Yeah.
That's one. Okay. That's one. Now, long E.
Oh, E. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And what? What?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. So this is.
Count.
Oops. Ganana, and this is. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
What?
Gandhi. Oh,
No,
whoops.
Gandhi. It's long vowel, Sarah. Long vowel.
Which one's long?
What's the first one?
Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. Yes. Okay. So, right. You're right. That is absolutely against the original thing I said. Do people actually pronounce it like that?
Well, if I can, so I'm pretty sure other speakers too. I mean, and look, I'll also give it to you that a lot of speakers would in their casual speech. That's where the allegro and the lento differences will come in.
Yeah.
Okay? What they're going to do is they're going to mess up. But
Well-
what I'm saying is that, supposing I were to speak to you,
Yeah.
right? I don't see why I will not be able to pronounce this
Well, it's not about ability, it's just a question of what people,
Mind
like,
you, I'm not saying that I have to be conscious to be able to speak.
yeah.
You understand?
Yes, I guess,
So in fast speech, yes, there will be a lot of assimilation for obvious reasons. It happens in all languages. But you see, I write that way, and because I'm saying it that way.
Yeah.
So I think not every speaker. That's only another thing. Her theory has been dealing with quite a lot of things. She was talking about the phonotactics. So I think here, one is that even my speech will have some other version of this particular word, right? It is possible. It depends when I'm speaking, right? And then I think my phonotactics does allow me to come up to say these sounds, and it's not that I really have to think about it. It's just that if you were to send me on a platform where I know that I have to give a formal speech.
Yeah.
I don't see.
In careful speech, you would say this as a retroflex nasal. I see.
Which is why I said I can do it even in careful speech.
Okay, you don't have a retroflex nasal there.
Sure. So you have a speaker who says that I can't do it. But on the other hand, you have these two speakers.
Right. So what I was thinking about when I said that I feel like the functional load of retroflexion, the retroflex nasal distinction is higher in Tamil, and gave the nasal example, was partly because I was thinking about cases like changes from Sanskrit to Hindi. So this is, and this is, right? I don't know exactly why this happened, so maybe this has to do with the rhotic getting lost as well. But here you have a retroflex nasal occurring without. Yes, you have the R there, which may have played a part, but you don't have a following retroflex stop. And then in Hindi, you get an alveolar nasal or a dental nasal rather, right? So I was sort of thinking about things like that. But what you've just said, pointing out this verb that has this retroflex nasal without a following stop is actually pretty convincing. It would be very convincing if there are lots of other words like this.
You see, this is one convincing word.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
And this is only one convincing word for me as well. So this is why I don't feel incredibly strongly about this.
I'm not aware of the Tamil data.
Yeah.
I hardly know any Tamil.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pick a couple of words. I won't say anything, but I think I'll have to go through the distributional, chart that you've already prepared to be able to say anything about Tamil. But I think you see what my point is.
I see exactly your point. Yeah, and you're absolutely right to bring that up.
Some issue with the distributional facts that you've been able to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention because I am, of course, a native speaker of neither of these languages, and my vocabulary is quite small.
And I think you can get some help from Ohala's Manjari's book,
Yes.
Especially that now that she has sound patterns in Hindi, 2014.
Yeah. Yeah.
She says something to that effect even in her 83 book when she wrote Hindi phonology.
Yeah.
Right? If you just look at it, I think there has to be something.
Yeah, I'll ask her about it when I'm back for sure. Because now that you point that out, I have exactly a word to ask her about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you all very much for your attention.